Greetings and salutations. In my last video, I showed how I make fairy wings at home out of readily available materials. For this video, I'll take you through my process for making these ornate, one-of-a-kind display domes. Buying domes of any decent size can get really expensive. Some of the large ones can be close to $100. And once you add postage to Australia on top of these costs, then it starts getting a bit out of my price range. Not to mention, they're all kind of the same looking and honestly a bit boring. I absolutely love a challenge and always try and keep my creations as eco-friendly as possible. Got to keep those good relations with the fair folk, you see. So I've devised a system for turning random bits of junk into fancy domes.
This is not junk!
So, what other materials will we need for this project? Let me explain, but bear with me as some of it can seem a bit random. I drink a nasty amount of instant coffee. This probably isn't great for my health, but it does have the benefit of providing me with weird shaped pieces of glass, which, when plonked on top of an upside down thing, can, with a little extra help, make for some more interesting shapes. So, off to the op shop I go, looking for any glass vessels large enough for my purposes. I'm specifically looking for little friends that, when turned upside down, will look good with a random assortment of stuff stuck to their butt, which I guess is now their head. Another thing that really helps bring the fancy is those end bits from curtain rods. Whenever I go up shopping, I try and keep my eyes open for any random objects that look like they would go well as a decorative topper. These old aluminium jelly molds look promising. I also try and scoop up any interesting glassware that I think will make nice hats. Once I've squeezed every last drop of good thrifting out of my local shops, it's time to head to the discount store. I like to use LED lighting in my domes, as then they're not only a piece of art, but can also provide mood lighting. When foraging, I always try and keep my eye open for discounted sets of battery-powered lights, preferably in lesser amounts, and with those tiny little blob lights on the thin wire. I managed to get these little mini strings for about $6 each. Not too bad. I do have plans on learning to solder my own LED circuits, but all in good time. These will have to do for now. I'll also make a video in this series to show how I make my light up mushrooms and plants for inside the domes, so if that's something you're curious about, stay tuned. Possibly even do all the helpful YouTubey things that involve bells and thumbs and such. You know what I mean, please don't make me say it. The other main ingredient in this DIY dome recipe is a round MDF teapot stand. I like the little beveled edges, and with a little creative adaptation, they seem to be a pretty good size for most glass containers. I also like using those little cedar moth bowls. These can make easy little feet for the base of your base. The downside of foraging for your ingredients is that sometimes you can't get exactly what you're after. This time I couldn't get the cedar bowls or the MDF teapot stands. What I did manage to find is some free wooden coat hangers. I'll be cutting these up and using them to strengthen some of the claw feet that I've made molds of. For context, this is what they look like. More on that later. Oh, and I'll also be using these little finials that I sculpted last year to use for finishing off my banners. Right, onto the recipes. There are two types of homemade clay that I use in the creation of the domes. One is for air-dried porcelain clay. The recipe for this one comes from Creative Cat Studios, and the other one is paper mache clay that I discovered through Johnny of Ultimate Paper Mache. I'll leave links to both of these videos in the description. I use both these recipes in the creation of the fairy sculptures themselves, but that's something for another video. Now I have my random collection of objects. I need to figure out how to assemble them into something resembling a fancy dome. First off, I try playing mix and match with all of the different pieces until I find a pleasing structure. Once I've come across pleasing assemblage, I'm going to make that baby permanent by gluing it together. I use Gorilla Glue for this as it seems to work well to hold the glass together. The instructions say to clamp it. This was clearly not an option though, but I made do. At this point I had to think forward a bit in the design process to make sure that the glued edges will be covered up, as this glue is like a brownish colour and can look kind of gross. If anyone has any recommendations of glues strong enough for the job that dry clear, I'd love it if you could let me know in the comments. I also decided to spray paint the insides of the coffee lids to help hide those ugly bits. So while we wait for the glue to set, let's move on to the bases. As I want to use LED lighting in these domes, feet are necessary. They help give the dome like a little bit of lift so that the battery housing can poke out from underneath of the base. I also like to use 3 legs so I don't have to worry about wobbling. The most simple foot style I use is the ball feet, and those can easily be attached with a screw or a nail through the middle. For the fancy feet, I previously sculpted some little dragon feet and some little goat feet out of various forms of clay, and then made silicone molds of them. In order to make duplicates, I make sure I have all my molds ready to go, as once the mix is activated by the plaster, there's only a short amount of time to get that goop in them holes before the mold sets. So for the mix, I take 1/8 of a cup of Johnny's paper clay recipe, 1/3 of a cup of water and 1 cup of plaster of Paris, and mix it all together, quickly filling the molds. This is also when I pop those little bits of the cut up coat hanger in for structural sturdiness. So why that combo of ingredients? Well, the plaster makes the mix dry quicker, which means I can demold them in a couple of hours, and the paper clay lends strength to the plaster. The combo is also a nice consistency to carve, so cleaning up the copies is pleasant. Now, I had to stop before I got too carried away with the bases and go back and drill holes for the little battery packs. I also made them these cute little cubbies out of hot glue and cardboard, so they have somewhere to live. Now that I have everything attached in the right places, I need to make it into one cohesive unit. After trimming back any of the escaped Gorilla Glue, I blob a bit of the paper mache paste onto the base and then pop the top where I want it to sit. The idea being to anchor the top so it doesn't go sliding around everywhere. This did work, but also ended up sticking to the glass a bit, which took some time-consuming wrangling to undo. Then I ended up making these little cardboard collars and temporarily attaching them to the glass tops. This really helped neaten up the edges and would have stopped a lot of the sticking. I then used paper mache clay to attach this to the base. Once that was all dry, all I had to do was take the tape off and release the glass. Next time I'll definitely be doing that step first. I then went ahead and attached the claw feet. I just attached them to the bases by drilling straight through the MDF into the feet. I then used some porcelain clay to strengthen any joins between feet and paper clay to shore up the little huts for the LEDs. After sculpting some extra details and of course some more setting aside to dry, I neatened up all the paper clay areas using air dry porcelain clay. I find having wet hands helps when smoothing the pieces on. Just look at these strange objects. Not bad for a random collection of op shop junk, eh? After a lot of final trimming, adding extra layers and eventual sanding, we're ready for a coat of paint. Let's get some colour on them and complete their makeovers. Masking off is a good idea, but due to the glass bit's glassy nature, you can just scrape any messy bits back with a scalpel. I like to give them a good coat of black acrylic paint as a base, and then dry brush whatever colour scheme I've decided on over the top. This is the point that I got to decorating with an assortment of stick-on gems that I procured in my earlier foraging missions. These ones have sticky backs, and that's useful for positioning them, but definitely not strong enough to hold them in place permanently. This is where the trusty old super glue came out to help strengthen the bond. I chucked a bit of nail polish over some of the gems to give them more coherence to the colour scheme, and a bit of final paint adjusting, and of course, more setting aside to dry. Once they were ready and wrapped in newspaper, coated to a clear gloss spray to seal it all in, and voila, new fairy domes. Okay, so the bases are obviously unfinished on the inside and will need filling up with something intriguing to look at, but that's another story for another day. I just shoved some random faux flowers in here, ready for the fancy final shots. Thanks for sticking with me through to the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts and of course hear about any of your own projects that you've been working on. If you have something you'd like to share, you could always tag it on Instagram using the hashtag Nickas_serpentarius_dome projects. It's always lovely to see what other creative types are up to. If you want to stay in the loop and get updates and discount codes and the occasional free downloadable, so on and so forth, feel free to head over to my website and sign up for my email newsletter. I also want to say a huge thank you to everyone for the support. My last video did way better than I'd expected, so a big thank you to everyone for that. I think that's all for now, so see you in the next one. Bye!